progressive pacification is in full swing, and it's taking shape in the push for a federal minimum wage hike to $15 an hour that will crush low-skilled workers, decimate small businesses, and boost massive corporations who will benefit from smaller competitors going bust. Bernie Sanders has been bending Joe Biden's fragile ear enough to make the new president say this.
But I do think that we should have a minimum wage stand by itself, $15 an hour, and work your way up to the 15. It doesn't have to be boom. And all the economics show if you do that, the whole economy rises.
Or it collapses like a failed souffle. It sounds appetizing before you make it, but in reality, it's a disaster. Minimum wage laws are geographically brutal because wages fluctuate as much as accents and mullets in our great nation. In Massachusetts, the average hourly wage is $31.58. But in Mississippi, it's only $19.27. This one-size-fits-all federal edict has pretty drastic consequences in places that can't afford the pay jolt, and many businesses that have been hardest hit by the pandemic would be the first to close or lay off new and lesser-trained employees. You know, the people who are most disenfranchised, who are in the greatest need of being lifted out of poverty. Restaurants, retails, transportation, these are all sectors that rely on new labor, but they'll have to both eliminate jobs and increase costs to comply. God, I hate the word compliance. So who is most sucker punched by this gouging? People who are already broke, who will now be forced to pay more. Thanks, big government weenuses. It perpetuates a cruel system that the CBO has shown will cost 1.4 million jobs by 2025. And guess what? When your job is a minimum wage casualty, that is the only job that matters. Jen Psaki coldly blathers that minimum wage hikes have minimal impact on employment. Well, tell that to the people who are now on food stamps because their job is now automated or obliterated. And what the hell do these government lackeys know? They'll always be gainfully employed by the bureaucratic beast and have zero perspective on reality, living on their government fart clouds. Talking about raising the minimum wage is an irrational attempt to seem benevolent. It does more harm than these dishonest agents will ever admit. For now, it's all malarkey, as President Biden himself admits it won't be part of the almost $2 trillion COVID package, and Joe Manchin is unwilling to subject his pained state to the statist savagery. Small businesses and the underemployed are safe for now, at least until a majority of crazy pinkos are finally running the asylum. And that's the memo. Discussions on minimum wage usually center on the effects for the person earning the wage, but businesses themselves often get hurt the most. In fact, a recent statistical analysis found that minimum wage increases lead to, quote, lower bank credit, higher loan defaults, lower employment, a lower entry, and a higher exit rate for small businesses. In other words, it makes it harder for companies, especially small companies, to start and operate. If they can't operate, they cannot hire. And certainly they can't pay for employees $15 an hour or anything else for that matter. So why do we keep spinning on this economic merry-go-round? Well, let's get into it with tonight's fantastic party panel. From the Washington Times, we've got opinion editor and Fox News contributor Charlie Hurt, along with former Libertarian Party vice presidential candidate Spike Cohen's on the party panel. Woo! And Democrat pollster and Fox News contributor, my friend Jessica Tarlov. Hello, everyone, and welcome to the show, Graham. Let's do this together.
Hello.
Hi.
Thank you, Kennedy. Thank you for having us on.
Thank you so much for being here. Charlie Hurt, I will start with you. So Democrats are talking about a minimum wage hike being the engine that will fuel economic reinvigoration. But what really reinvigorates an economy?
Well, not that, to be sure. I've done a little test over the last couple of weeks. Every small business that I walk into, and I try to only go to small businesses, every single one of them I go into, I ask every one of them, how about $15 a $15 minimum wage? And they turn ghost white. And the reason is, and you touched on all of it, you know, these companies that have managed to survive the worst downturn in the history of this country, they survived the pandemic. They have pulled out, they've done everything in their power to stay open and to cling to some semblance of life. The idea that these politicians in Washington would even be talking about this at a moment like this, it would obliterate anyone that has managed to survive this long. It would obliterate them. And as you point out, it doesn't do it. All this is, it's a job killer. It does nothing to help anyone, and it is truly devastating.
It is devastating, but not for places like Amazon, Spike, because big corporations like that, they can absorb a self-imposed minimum wage, which they already have.
Exactly.
But they also know that it is the thing that will crush smaller competitors, and that's why it's great for big businesses who often co-write massive entitlement legislation like Obamacare, knowing that they will be favored through it all.
And not only that, but it also creates the economic conditions for them to pay their employees even less. When you create conditions where the demand for something goes down and the supply for something goes up, that creates a glut, which means that the person consuming that thing, in this case, American labor, that means that they can pay less for that thing. That's exactly what these job-killing regulations and taxes and mandates and all of the things that the big crony corporations push for to protect the worker. But the reality is, it's to put their smaller competitors out of business and to make it so that they can charge less, they can pay less for that American labor. If we do the opposite, if we deregulate, get rid of these absurd job-crushing regulations and cause the value of American labor to go up, the demand for it to go up, and subsequently the number of Americans that are looking for good jobs to go down because they already have good jobs or they're able to start their own business, that leads to increases in wages without having to have any kind of mandates or anything that's going to hurt jobs in the process.
All right, so, and Spike, those are all fantastic points, and that is why you're here. But Jessica, the fear isn't that this is a minimum wage. The fear is that this becomes the maximum wage, and then there is economic stagnation for millions and millions of Americans because you no longer have the potential for growth. You've actually just put a ceiling on most of the economy.
Well, that's an interesting spin on it. I actually haven't heard that much about that being the issue with this. I've heard the real issue is that there are millions of Americans who are adults who are raising families and putting food on the table, earning way less than $15 an hour, sometimes having to take 2 jobs in order to support their families. There's this fallacy out there that minimum wage earners are teenagers or recent graduates or people in their young 20s, but that's not true. There are people in their 30s, 40s, 50s, et cetera, people who cannot afford to survive on as low of a wage as we have. It's 7 1/4 on a federal level, and I think we're all sensible people on this panel. We can agree that it needs to come up from there. There are 100 economists who've all won Nobel Prizes who agree that 1010 wouldn't have a deleterious effect on the economy. Go to 1010. Hillary Clinton supported a $12 minimum wage. That's where Senate Democrats were just a few years ago. Let's talk about that.
Okay,
and no one wants to have that discussion. Talk about businesses. This is about people. This is about Americans who will be lifted out of poverty as well.
This is about people who are going to lose millions of jobs as a result of these bad regulations. Those economic experts we keep hearing about are the ones who put us in the mess that we're in right now. They keep giving us the next set of edicts of what's going to fix this economic mess that they put us in, and this is simply the newest one. The reality is we are talking about people. We are talking about people who will get the real minimum wage as a result of these jobs. The real minimum wage is what happens when you lose your jobs and you make $0 and 0 cents an hour.
Right. Yes, exactly. And that's the job that matters. When you lose your job, that is the one that matters most. And these people in Washington, the ones that are dictating the edicts, just like you pointed out, Spike, they will never lose their jobs because they will always have a government to fall back on with pensions. They are divorced from reality. And so, you know, we talked a little bit about the pandemic and how a minimum wage hike would affect companies most affected by the pandemic. Well, now let's talk about the origins of it, because the heavily Chinese-influenced World Health Organization, they just took a field trip to Wuhan, China. They have finished, along with their investigation into the origins of the virus. And lo and behold, they say it probably didn't come from the Wuhan lab at all. Instead, at a press conference today, the international team of investigators announced it is highly unlikely the coronavirus escaped from the notorious Wuhan virology lab. They say the next target of investigation should be farms and supply chains in Southeast Asia that do business with Wuhan markets. But former Secretary of State Mike Pompeo, he says not so fast.
I hope that they got to see all the data, all the science, into the lab, talk to the doctors, interview them in private, in places where they could actually tell the truth about what took place, not under the supervision of a Communist Party person sitting in the back of the room, making sure that they towed the Communist Party line. So look forward to seeing their results.
Right.
I continue to know that there was significant evidence, Bill, that this may well have come from that laboratory.
In other words, it doesn't smell like Teen Spirit. It smells like a cover-up. So is the WHO just covering for their Chinese masters? Charlie, I don't believe it. It took almost a year of negotiations to get that investigatory team into the country. China was completely opaque. Lord knows what they've done with any evidence between then and now. And I think it is a sham investigation. Your thoughts?
Oh, my goodness. It is such a sham investigation. And it is obvious to any normal person, and by normal person, I mean anyone who isn't in Washington making all the rules around here, that from the beginning, China has been a bad actor. How bad of an actor? We don't know. I'm not suggesting that this was intentional, but it certainly raises a lot of questions. I don't think we can say it was not intentional. China has been a bad actor at every single step of the way, whether it was alerting other countries to the disease, whether it was cooperating with other countries in terms of how to deal with it and how to suppress it. The WHO has been an enabler from the beginning. They have worked at the behest of the Chinese Communist government to help cover it up and to stymie efforts to get to the bottom of all of this. And it's so clearly obvious to everybody who isn't in Washington. And it's kind of like the minimum wage thing. It's like, is it just a coincidence that these big companies that benefit from a higher minimum wage, that they have all the lobbyists in Washington? What's going on here? Who is Washington working for? I don't know. It's really curious.
Look at all the people who have gotten sick from the virus and who have died. Jessica, and China's reaction to all that has been incredibly cruel. It's like they're treating the rest of the world like a Uyghur camp, and the fact that they have lacked such transparency is condemnable. Your thoughts?
Oh, absolutely. And on the Uyghurs front, that BBC reporting from last week about the systemic rape that goes on in those camps was
awful.
Some of the most harrowing stuff that I've ever read in my entire life.
Yep.
I'm really torn about this. Yeah, well, we're all in agreement, so we can just end the show. Finally, I've won. The WHO is very difficult to trust at this point. Obviously, the Chinese, whether it came from a pangolin in a wet market or from one of their labs, certainly didn't want to fill in the rest of the world on what was going on, and millions of people are dead as a result of that. So that we know just as a blanket statement. I recently listened to a few podcasts that featured scientists that believe firmly and say that the scientific community is almost near unanimous in believing that this did most likely come from the lab, which refutes the WHO report. And I really hope that we are able to get to the bottom of this, because if something like this happens again, or as we see more of these strains that are more harsh, more virulent, like the South African one, it's blown up the AstraZeneca vaccine,
that's
for
what
instance.
a virus
we need
is going
to know
to do.
as much as possible about this.
That is the natural state of things. That's what a virus is going to do. It's going to mutate and vary itself in order to find new hosts. My worry here, Spike, is that there could be another pandemic that's worse than this one. So if we can't get to the bottom of this, which could be a test run, what on earth does the future look like?
Well, the thing is, I don't trust any proto-communists who believe that the answer to everything is to exert greater government control. And for that matter, I don't trust the Chinese government either. The World Health Organization, to even get into the country, had to spend, as you said, nearly a year of negotiations to even be able to get in. And it just so happens that one of the theories that would completely blow out all of the conventional thinking as to how this virus was created, and which is probably not likely but possible, the fact that one of the maximum security biolabs was dead center in the middle of where this virus was expected to have originated from, and for them to simply say, Well, it's not likely, so we're just not even going to look into it. That's circular logic, and that's the opposite of how the scientific method works. You test a hypothesis. I think that for them to even get in, they had to agree to not even look into that in the first place. I think that's pretty clear.
It's so wrong. And in 2018, there were cables from U.S. diplomats saying that there were grave security concerns about that Wuhan lab. So there are so many ominous arrows that point to one direction. We'll get there at some point. At some point, conspiracy theory will become law.